So, according to The Times, there's been a bit of a cabinet row or disagreement, let's say, between Suella Braverman and Michael Gove over the contents of the long-awaited review into the controversial Prevent counter-terror programme. While Braverman is reportedly ready to publish the review, Mr Gove is said to be unhappy that the Home Office has decided not to publish the names of several individuals and groups because of fears the department could be sued. Is this an example of our PC culture gone mad? Surely it's in the national interest to name and shame those pushing extremist narratives, even if said individuals and organisations are offended. And surely it's an absolute scandal, really, if some of these groups are receiving money from the Prevent programme, essentially from you and I, and still promoting extremist narratives. Emma, I'll start with you. There's a lot to get stuck into here, so perhaps I'll ask for your general take on this cabinet row. Do you think Michael Gove is fair enough that he is reportedly saying, you know, we shouldn't be redacting these names?
I mean, there are several questions that I would ask. So there are times when the Home Office will need to redact reports for national security. For me, as a journalist, as someone who believes that we should have transparency in government, those should be the only times that that's allowed, and it shouldn't be done for fear of legal challenge. If the Home Office are saying things they shouldn't say, they should be legally challenged. And I've made that case when there have been times on this channel where they've been upset about legal challenges to government policy. But if they're getting things wrong, that is a democratic right. If, on the other hand, there are things in this report they don't want to tell us about but still exist and are sitting within that policy, then we should know those. And if those are then legally challengeable, they should be legally challenged. So I think that you've got to have a nuanced view where you say the report should be public unless there are national security issues around it. And then if, on the other hand, that report is then saying things that people find to be untrue, to be challengeable, that also needs to be part of the process.
Yes, because the Prevent programme, of course, has been a controversial one. People have said in the past that it could essentially target people for thought crimes. You know, there have been stories of children being referred to the Prevent programme after making a ill-advised joke. Or on the far right side, I remember a young boy, I think it was, got referred to the Prevent programme for looking up the UKIP website. So that was a red flag, apparently, that he could be far right. What do you think? It must be in the national interest for the Home Office. This is an independent review. This is an independent report. Surely we need to see the contents.
Definitely. I think that parliamentary privilege exists for a reason. The Home Secretary is able to stand up in Parliament in a statement and use parliamentary privilege to say what she likes. As long as she does that in good conscience, I think she should be naming and shaming those organisations. But I think Michael Gove is making a bigger point, which is that Prevent has lost its original purpose, and having far-right referrals outstrip Islamicist referrals last year shows that the programme is off course. We need to be dealing with the real threat to our country, which predominantly comes from Islamicist extremism. It doesn't come predominantly from far-right groups. And in fact, as you've spoken about, a lot of the far-right referrals have been shown to be politically motivated referrals by teachers on the left of politics who are unhappy with their students having independent thought.
Well, William, you raise a very interesting and slightly controversial take, but I believe you to be right in that respect. We hear from people who know, experts, that Islamism is still by far the biggest threat. Obviously, far-right extremism is growing, but Islamist extremism remains the major threat when it comes to terrorism in this country. Why do you think more far-right cases are being referred?
Well, because, as you say, it's growing, so there will be more.
Do you think it's that, or do you think it's sensitivities?
No, I mean, I think
it's easier to go after the far-right.
I don't think it's easier to go after the far-right than Islamists at all. I think there are threats from the far-right. I mean, I remember a friend of mine who was an MP who was killed by someone who was from the far right. So we can't deny that this threat exists. We just before Christmas saw far-right terrorism in France. So it's important that we look at all of the threats and take them out of an ideological lens. It's not about whether you agree with this point of view or you disagree with this point of view. It absolutely shouldn't be the case that someone Googling a website for a legitimate political party, however much you might find that political party's views repugnant, is the same as the likelihood of a child being radicalised, that's appalling. But we do need to be making sure that we are looking at the threats that are coming, and if that is growing on the far right, as you've said, then that needs to be growing in the way where Prevent is looking at.
But I'm a little more sceptical, because if we look at the horrific cases of grooming gangs and the cover-up that ensued, that was down to the fact that many of the police officers and social care and so on were so worried about stigmatising a minority ethnic group, a minority religious group in this country, that they didn't take it any further. And I do worry that with this Prevent programme, it's much easier for Mrs Smith in, the high school down the road to refer a far-right child, or she suspects might be interested in that ideology, than for her to be seen to be targeting a young Muslim lad. Well, do you think that there might be any of that? Would you concede?
I think that there are always, if it's an individual, I mean, I don't think, frankly, it should be down to teachers to be doing this too much. It seems to have been massively pushed to people who are not properly trained in it, to make a lot of these referrals. These cases should be tested by people who know what they're doing when it comes to terrorism prevention. And again, all ideology should be taken out of that. If a child is seen to be at risk of radicalisation, be it by the far right, be it by Islamists, be it by anybody else, they should be dealt with and properly assessed in that way. And it should be a non-ideological programme. And the problem with turning it into is it this or is it that football, we take it out of what's practical and pragmatic and should work.
But isn't that one of the great criticisms, Will, of the Prevent programme, that it hasn't understood the ideological basis for Islamist extremism? That it hasn't targeted the ideology that is so anti-liberal and so anti-Western and essentially perpetuates things like ISIS.
So Prevent isn't just for teachers to refer, it's actually about broader community groups, society groups, which is why it is a very powerful weapon, but it also needs to be done in moderation, right? Because it is a chilling on free speech approach. But exactly what you're saying is true. I think it's very clear that Prevent has radically gone the wrong way, should be refocused onto Islamicist.
I'm just reading here, it's got a £40 million budget. And am I not right in thinking that one of the men who was, essentially stabbed someone on London Bridge, I believe, had just been at a de-radicalisation event? So something's going wrong in terms of flagging up these people. And then, obviously, the de-radicalisation process that is separate to the Prevent programme.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and clearly where people are identified as being going into a pipeline of extremism, they should be pulled out and they should be looked at by the security services. But I don't think any one of us on this panel is equipped to do that. If the security services say they need a tool to do the job, it's Parliament and our job as political engaged citizens to look at whether that tool is working. Now, this review asks, is the programme working? And I would say when far-right referrals are outstripping Islamicist referrals, clearly it's not working.
Well, also, I would say it's not working if groups and individuals contained in this report have been taking money from, essentially, the taxpayer, from the Prevent programme, and then still perpetuating extremist narratives. That is genuinely taking the mick of the entire system, and it's appalling that that is happening.